The Italian peninsula shows evidence of habitation by anatomically modern humans beginning about 43,000 years ago. It is reached by the Neolithic as early as 6000 BC. The Italian Bronze Age begins around 1500 BC, likely corresponding to the arrival of Indo-European speakers whose descendants would become the Italic peoples of the Iron Age, alongside the early Italic cultures. However, the Etruscan civilization in central Italy and Greek colonies in the south flourished during 8th to 5th centuries BC. Among the Italic peoples, the Latins, originally situated in the Latium region, and their Latin language would come to dominate the peninsula with the Roman conquest of Italy in the 3rd century BC. The Roman Republic and later the Roman Empire dominated Italy for many centuries, and furthermore established the culture and civilization of Western Europe in general, including the adoption and subsequent spread of Christianity as state religion at the end of the 4th century. The decline and collapse of the Western Empire by the end of the 5th century is taken to mark the end of late antiquity. A Lombard kingdom of Italy was established, although parts of the peninsula remained under Byzantine rule and influence until the 11th century. The Lombard kingdom was incorporated into Francia and ultimately the Holy Roman Empire, although the rise of city-states, and especially the powerful maritime republics in the medieval period, led to political fragmentation. Ultimately, after the disastrous Italian Wars, the peninsula was divided among the great powers of early modern Europe, Spain and Austria, and later fell to the French Empire under Napoleon I, the Papal States being reduced to the control of the Holy See over Rome. With the rise of nationalism and the idea of the nation-state in the 19th century, the peninsula was unified in the late 19th century. The new Kingdom of Italy, established in 1861, quickly modernized and built a large colonial empire, colonizing parts of Africa, and countries along the Mediterranean. However, many regions of the young nation remained rural and poor, originating the Italian diaspora. Part of the victorious Allied powers of World War I, Italy defeated its historical enemy, the Austrian Empire. Soon afterwards, however, the liberal state collapsed to social unrest. The fascists, led by Benito Mussolini, took over and set up an authoritarian dictatorship. Italy joined the Axis powers in World War II, falling into a bloody civil war in 1943, with the fascist faction finally defeated in the spring of 1945. In 1946, as a result of a constitutional referendum, the monarchy was abolished. The new republic was proclaimed on the 2nd of June 1946. In the 1950s and 1960s, Italy saw a period of rapid modernization and sustained economic growth, the so-called Italian economic miracle. The country, coming back to international politics among Western democratic powers, joined the European Economic Community, the United Nations, NATO, the G7 and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Italy is currently ranked as a major European power. Prehistory. In prehistoric times, the Italian peninsula was rather different from its current shape. During the last ice age, the islands of Elba and Sicily were connected to the mainland. The Adriatic Sea was far smaller, since it started at what is now the Gargano Peninsula, and what is now the Bay of Venice was a fertile plain with a humid climate. Flint tools uncovered at Pirro Nord show that ancient humans were present in Italy 1.5 million years ago. The presence of the Homo neanderthalensis has been demonstrated in archaeological findings dating to c. 50,000 years ago. Homo sapiens sapiens appeared during the Upper Paleolithic. In November 2011, tests conducted at the Oxford Radiocarbon Accelerator Unit in England on what were previously thought to be Neanderthal baby teeth, which had been unearthed in 1964 from the Grotta del Cavallo, were identified as the oldest modern human remains discovered anywhere in Europe. dating from between 43,000 to 45,000 years ago. Remains of the later prehistoric age have been found in Liguria, Lombardy and in Sardinia. The most famous is perhaps that of Otzi the Iceman, the mummy of a mountain hunter found in the Similorn Glacier in South Tyrol, dating to c. 3000 BC. During the Copper Age, Indo-European people migrated to Italy. Approximately 4 waves of population from north to the Alps have been identified. A first Indo-European migration occurred around the mid-3rd millennium BC, from population who imported coppersmithing. The Remodello culture took over the Po Valley. A second wave of immigration occurred in the Bronze Age, from the late 3rd to the early 2nd millennium BC, with tribes identified with the Beaker culture and by the use of bronze smithing, in the Padan Plain, in Tuscany and on the coasts of Sardinia and Sicily. In the mid-2nd millennium BC, a third wave arrived, associated with the Apenninian civilization and the Terramare culture, which takes its name from the black earth residue of settlement mounds, which have long served the fertilizing needs of local farmers. The occupations of the Terramare people as compared with their Neolithic predecessors may be inferred with comparative certainty. They were still hunters, but had domesticated animals. They were fairly skillful metallurgists, casting bronze in molds of stone and clay. And they were also agriculturists, cultivating beans, the vine, wheat and flax. In the Late Bronze Age, from the late 2nd millennium to the early 1st millennium BC, a fourth wave, the Proto-Villanovan culture, related to the Central European Urnfield culture, brought iron working to the Italian peninsula. Proto-Villanovans practiced cremation and buried the ashes of their dead in pottery urns of distinctive double cone shape. Generally speaking, Proto-Villanovan settlements were centered in the northern central part of the peninsula. Further south, in Campania, a region where inhumation was the general practice, Proto-Villanovan cremation burials have been identified at Capua, at the princely tombs of Ponte Cagnano near Salerno and at Sala Consilina. Neolithic civilization located in Sardinia and Corsica. The Neolithic civilization lasted from the early Bronze Age to the 2nd century AD, when the islands were already Romanized. The Neolithic towers are unanimously considered the best preserved and largest megalithic remains in Europe. Their effective use is still debated. Some scholars considered them as monumental tombs, others as houses of the giants, others as fortresses, ovens for metal fusion, prisons, or, finally, temples for a solar cult. A warrior and mariner people, the ancient Sardinians held flourishing trades with the other Mediterranean peoples. This is shown by numerous remains contained in the Neolithic, such as amber coming from the Baltic Sea, small bronzes portraying African apes and animals, copper nuggets and weapons from Eastern Mediterranean, Mycenaean ceramics. It has been hypothesized that the ancient Sardinians, or part of them, could be identified with one of the so-called peoples of the sea who attacked ancient Egypt and other regions of Eastern Mediterranean. Other original elements of the Sardinian civilization include the temples known as sacred pits, perhaps dedicated to the holy water related to the moon in astronomical cycles, the giants' graves, the Megaron temples, several structures for juridical and leisure functions, and some refined statuettes. Some of them have been discovered in Etruscan tombs, suggesting a strong relationship between the two peoples. Iron Age. Italy gradually enters the proto-historical period in the 8th century BC, with the introduction of the Phoenician script and its adaptation in various regional variants. The name Italia was in origin applied only to a portion of what is now Calabria, possibly from an Oscan name Vitelliu, interpreted as land of young cattle. It was not applied to the entire peninsula until the 1st century BC. Etruscan civilization. The Etruscan civilization flourished in central Italy after 800 BC. The origins of the Etruscans are lost in prehistory. The main hypotheses are that they are indigenous, probably stemming from the Villanovan culture, or that they are the result of invasion from the north or the Near East. A more recent study has suggested a Near Eastern origin. The researchers conclude that their data, taken from the modern Tuscan population, support the scenario of a post-Neolithic genetic input from the Near East to the present-day population of Tuscany. In the absence of any dating evidence, there is however no direct link between this genetic input and the Etruscans. By contrast, a mitochondrial DNA study of 2013 has suggested that the Etruscans were probably an indigenous population. Among ancient populations, ancient Etruscans are found to be closest to a Neolithic population from Central Europe. It is widely accepted that Etruscans spoke a non-Indo-European language. Some inscriptions in a similar language have been found on the Aegean island of Lemnos. Etruscans were a monogamous society that emphasized pairing. The historical Etruscans had achieved a form of state with remnants of chiefdom and tribal forms. The Etruscan religion was an immanent polytheism, in which all visible phenomena were considered to be a manifestation of divine power. Etruscan expansion was focused across the Apennines. Some small towns in the 6th century BC have disappeared during this time, ostensibly consumed by greater, more powerful neighbors. However, there exists no doubt that the political structure of the Etruscan culture was similar, albeit more aristocratic, to Magna Graecia in the south. The mining and commerce of metal, especially copper and iron, led to an enrichment of the Etruscans and to the expansion of their influence in the Italian peninsula and the western Mediterranean Sea. Here their interests collided with those of the Greeks, especially in the 6th century BC, when Phocians of Italy founded colonies along the coast of France, Catalonia and Corsica. This led the Etruscans to ally themselves with the Carthaginians, whose interests also collided with the Greeks. Around 540 BC, the Battle of Alalia led to a new distribution of power in the western Mediterranean Sea. Though the battle had no clear winner, Carthage managed to expand its sphere of influence at the expense of the Greeks, and Etruria saw itself relegated to the northern Tyrrhenian Sea with full ownership of Corsica. From the first half of the 5th century, the new international political situation meant the beginning of the Etruscan decline after losing their southern provinces. In 480 BC, Etruria's ally Carthage was defeated by a coalition of Magna Graecia cities led by Syracuse. A few years later, in 474, Syracuse's tyrant Hiera defeated the Etruscans at the Battle of Cumae. Etruria's influence over the cities of Latium and Campania weakened, and it was taken over by Romans and Samnites. In the 4th century, Etruria saw a Gallic invasion end its influence over the Po Valley and the Adriatic coast. Meanwhile, Rome had started annexing Etruscan cities. This led to the loss of their north provinces. Etruria was assimilated by Rome around 500 BC, Magna Graecia in the 8th and 7th centuries BC, for various reasons, including demographic crisis, the search for new commercial outlets and ports, and expulsion from their homeland. Greeks began to settle in southern Italy. Also during this period, Greek colonies were established in places as widely separated as the eastern coast of the Black Sea, eastern Libya and Massalia. They included settlements in Sicily and the southern part of the Italian peninsula. The Romans called the area of Sicily and the foot of Italy Magna Graecia, since it was so densely inhabited by the Greeks. The ancient geographers differed on whether the term included Sicily or merely Apulia and Calabria, Strabo being the most prominent advocate of the wider definitions. With this colonization, Greek culture was exported to Italy, in its dialects of the ancient Greek language, its religious rites and its traditions of the independent polis. An original Hellenic civilization soon developed, later interacting with the native Italic and Latin civilizations. The most important cultural transplant was the Chalchidaean, Cumaean variety of the Greek alphabet. which was adopted by the Etruscans. The old Italic alphabet subsequently evolved into the Latin alphabet, which became the most widely used alphabet in the world. Many of the new Hellenic cities became very rich and powerful, like Neapolis, Syracuse, Akragas, and Sybaris. After Pyrrhus of Epirus failed in his attempt to stop the spread of Roman hegemony in 282 BC, the south fell under Roman domination and remained in such a position well into the barbarian invasions. It was held by the Byzantine Empire after the fall of Rome in the west, and even the Lombards failed to consolidate it, though the center of the south was theirs from Zato's conquest in the final quarter of the 6th century.